Where the Road Leads, Chapter 3. Ink and Paper. A week later, Wei Ying was finally discharged from the infirmary. His injuries were far from healed. The marks left by Zidian still stretched across his back, angry and purple beneath layers of medicine and bandages. But he no longer required constant supervision. At least, that was the official reason. The real reason was far simpler. Madame Yu had made it abundantly clear that she did not wish him occupying a bed in the healer's wing any longer than necessary. Thus, Wei Ying was moved back to his room, a small building situated on the outskirts of Lotus Pier, far from the main residences, far from the disciples' quarters, far from the central courtyards. The room itself wasn't unpleasant. It was clean, dry, private. But it was also isolated. The furthest room Madame Yu had been willing to grant him when Jiang Fengmian first brought him to Lotus Pier. At the time, Wei Ying had accepted it gratefully. A roof was a roof. A bed was a bed. Now, however, he saw it differently. So did He Qingyuan. For once, the isolation would be useful. Very useful. Every morning began much the same way. Before lessons started, before Madame Yu's attention shifted toward managing the sect, before the day's activities consumed everyone, the Jiang siblings would visit. Without fail, Jiang Yanli always arrived carrying food. Sometimes soup, sometimes pastries, sometimes small dishes she had prepared herself. She never mentioned the punishment, never forced him to discuss it. She simply smiled gently and ensured he ate properly, as though trying to make up for something she had never done. Zhang Cheng, meanwhile, handled his concern differently. He would sit nearby and complain. About lessons, about disciples, about instructors, about anything that came to mind. Occasionally, he would demonstrate a sword form he had learned, or explain a cultivation technique taught during training, usually while insisting he wasn't doing it for Wei Ying's sake. The contradiction was obvious to everyone except Jiang Cheng himself. Wei Ying found the visits strangely comforting, not because they solved anything, but because they reminded him that not everyone in Lotus Pier wished him harm. Unfortunately, Madame Yu eventually noticed, and promptly lost her patience. The order came swiftly. The siblings were no longer permitted to spend extended periods in Wei Ying's room. A brief morning visit was tolerated. Nothing more. Jiang Yanli protested. Jiang Cheng argued. Neither succeeded. After that, the morning visits became their only guaranteed time together. Once they left, they rarely returned until the following day. That was when He Qingyuan would arrive. The old healer came every afternoon. Officially, he was checking the progress of Wei Ying's recovery. Unofficially, he was helping prepare for a very different future. The routine quickly established itself. First came the medical treatment. Fresh medicine, new bandages, careful examination of the wounds. Only after the door was securely closed would the second part begin. Books. Always books. At first, He Qingyuan produced them casually, as though lending reading material to an injured child. A handbook on edible plants, a guide to wilderness survival, a text discussing common medicinal herbs, maps, travel journals, books detailing the customs of various regions, practical knowledge, useful knowledge, knowledge a wandering cultivator would need. Wei Ying devoured every single one. The old healer soon realized there was little point bringing fiction. Wei Ying ignored it entirely. If a book contained practical information, it was read. If it didn't, it remained untouched. And then came the notebooks, stacks of them, along with paper, ink, brushes, everything required for taking notes. The moment He Qingyuan placed the first brush into his hand, something unexpected happened. Wei Ying froze. The room became completely silent. He stared at the brush, then at the blank sheet of paper, then back at the brush. His hands began shaking. At first, He Qingyuan thought the injuries were bothering him. Then he noticed the tears. Wei Ying wasn't in pain. He was crying. The old healer sat quietly and waited. Eventually, the tears came harder. Silent at first, then impossible to stop. He cried for a very long time. In another life, Zhaozhan had spent years learning. Teacher Chen had made certain of that. The man who had caused the accident had devoted countless hours trying to give him some semblance of a future. Books, lessons, presentations, videos, entire courses prepared specifically for a child trapped in a hospital bed. Teacher Chen had taught him mathematics, history, literature, science, anything he could think of. He had read stories aloud, displayed educational videos on the television mounted inside the hospital room, explained concepts patiently, again and again. But through all those years, Zhaozhan had never written a single word himself. He couldn't. His hands wouldn't obey him. His fingers couldn't grasp a pen, couldn't hold a brush, couldn't turn a page. Everything he learned existed only inside his mind. Now, sitting in a small room within Lotus Pier, he held a brush between his fingers. A simple thing, ordinary, something countless people did every day without thought. Yet to him it felt miraculous. The brush trembled, ink touched paper, and Wei Ying cried. After that day he became almost obsessed, writing, taking notes, copying information. Organizing knowledge. He filled page after page. Everything useful was recorded. Herbs, locations, landmarks, travel routes, dangerous creatures, medicinal recipes, methods of preserving food, weather patterns, regional customs, anything that might help him survive, anything that might prove useful later. The notebooks multiplied rapidly. Soon He Qingyuan had to bring extras. Every few days he quietly exchanged completed notebooks for empty ones. The finished copies vanished into his Qiangkun pouch for safekeeping. Their growing collection remained hidden from curious eyes. Wei Ying didn't mind. The information wasn't for anyone else. It was for him, for the future, for the day he finally left Lotus Pier behind. One afternoon, He Qingyuan entered to find Wei Ying bent over a notebook. Completely absorbed, the old healer watched silently for several moments. The boy hadn't noticed him. Ink stained his fingers. Several books lay open around him. Sheets of paper covered the table. The room looked less like a patient's quarters and more like a scholar's study. Eventually, He Qingyuan cleared his throat. Wei Ying nearly jumped out of his skin. The healer laughed. "You were that focused?" Wei Ying immediately covered several pages. The gesture was so suspicious that He Qingyuan raised an eyebrow. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing." The answer came far too quickly. The healer sat down. Wei Ying looked away, which naturally made the old healer even more curious. Eventually, after several minutes of persistence, Wei Ying reluctantly handed over the notebook. He Qingyuan opened it, then blinked. The pages weren't filled with copied information, nor cultivation notes, nor survival techniques. Instead, he found a list. A very long list. At the top of the first page, written in careful characters, were 4 words. Things I want to do. Beneath them, see the ocean. Climb a mountain. Watch the sunrise. Watch the sunset. Fly a kite. Learn fishing. Sleep beneath the stars. Visit every major city. Cross a desert. See snow. Ride a boat. Attend a festival. Walk through a bamboo forest. Learn to cook. See a waterfall. The list continued for several pages. Dozens, then hundreds. Simple things, ordinary things, experiences most people never bothered recording. He Qingyuan slowly turned another page. Then another, and another. When he finally looked up, Wei Ying was staring at the floor. Embarrassed, the healer closed the notebook carefully, then returned it. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, He Qingyuan smiled. A warm smile, perhaps the warmest Wei Ying had seen from him. "Then we'd better make sure you leave." Wei Ying looked up. The old healer tapped the notebook. "That list is far too long to remain unfinished." For the first time that day, Wei Ying smiled. A genuine smile. And somewhere deep inside, the road waiting beyond Lotus Pier seemed just a little closer. Among all the books He Qingyuan brought him, there was one category that immediately captured Wei Ying's attention. Talismans. Arrays. The moment he discovered them, he was fascinated. Perhaps it was because they were practical. Perhaps because they rewarded creativity rather than brute strength. Or perhaps because they felt like puzzles waiting to be solved. Whatever the reason, Wei Ying devoured every text he could find. Unfortunately, Lotus Pier was not particularly renowned for either field. The Jiang sect focused primarily on swordsmanship and orthodox cultivation. The collection available to disciples was modest at best. A handful of introductory texts, several manuals on common talismans, basic array formations, nothing particularly advanced. Still, Wei Ying treasured every page. He copied entire sections into his notebooks, carefully, meticulously, making certain he preserved every detail. If he left Lotus Pier one day, he would not have access to the sect library anymore. Anything he wanted to keep, he would have to carry with him. So he copied, and copied, and copied some more. By the time He Qingyuan discovered what he was doing, several notebooks had already been filled with diagrams and annotations. The old healer merely shook his head. "You truly intend to take half the library with you?" Wei Ying didn't even look up from his work. "If I can't take the books, I'll take the knowledge." The response made He Qingyuan laugh. The days slipped by quietly. Then the weeks. Before either of them realized it, 2 months had passed. Wei Ying's recovery progressed far better than anyone expected. The wounds had long since closed. The scars remained, faint and pale against his skin, but the pain had largely disappeared. Every day, after finishing his reading and note-taking, he spent several hours meditating, carefully, patiently, strengthening his newly formed golden core, nourishing damaged meridians, encouraging recovery. The results were noticeable. His spiritual energy grew steadier. His stamina improved. Even his complexion became healthier. He Qingyuan observed all of this and reported absolutely none of it. Whenever Jiang Fengmian inquired about Wei Ying's condition, the old healer remained perfectly serious. The meridians are still recovering. He must avoid strenuous cultivation. Additional rest remains necessary. The explanations were plausible enough. After all, Zidian was no ordinary weapon. Few questioned the healer's assessment. Jiang Fengmian certainly didn't. The sect leader looked increasingly troubled whenever the subject arose, yet he never challenged the restrictions. For that, Wei Ying was grateful. Every extra day bought him more time to prepare. Eventually, however, remaining confined to his room became impractical. Exactly 2 months after the punishment, He Qingyuan finally announced that limited activity was permissible. The news spread quickly. Most disciples assumed Wei Ying would immediately return to training. Instead, he spent his first few days doing something unexpected: watching. Every morning, he quietly made his way to the training grounds, then sat down beneath a nearby tree and observed junior disciples, senior disciples, instructors, everyone. From dawn until afternoon, sword forms filled the training fields, movements repeated endlessly. Again, and again, and again. Most people paid him little attention. After all, he wasn't participating, merely sitting there, watching. Recovering. At least that's what they assumed. What nobody realized was that Wei Ying wasn't simply watching. He was studying. Every stance, every movement, every transition, every correction given by instructors. His eyes followed everything. Patterns began emerging. Connections, sequences, principles. The forms gradually embedded themselves into memory. Not perfectly, not yet, but enough. By the end of each day, he could mentally reconstruct entire training sessions. Then, after nightfall, he returned to his room, closed the door, and practiced. Only once, never more, just enough to ensure the movements settled into muscle memory. The results were mixed, very mixed. His body remembered some things, forgot others. Several movements felt awkward. Others flowed naturally. Sometimes he lost his balance. Sometimes he struck furniture. Once he nearly knocked over an entire shelf. That incident required considerable cleanup. Still, progress was progress. The forms gradually became familiar, not polished, not refined, but recognizable. And for now, that was enough. He wasn't preparing to compete with Jiang Cheng, or impress instructors, or become the strongest disciple of Lotus Pier. He was preparing to survive. A rogue cultivator couldn't depend on sect elders, or training halls, or instructors. Everything he learned now would have to carry him later. So every night, beneath the dim light of a lantern, Wei Ying practiced. Clumsy, imperfect, determined. One form at a time, one step at a time, just as he had learned to walk this path from the beginning. As summer slowly deepened, another realization settled over him. The discussion conference was approaching. 3 months had seemed impossibly distant on the night he first arrived at the infirmary. Now only weeks remained. Every sunrise brought him closer to departure, closer to freedom, closer to the road waiting beyond Lotus Pier. And every night, before sleeping, Wei Ying would open one particular notebook, the one titled, "Things I Want to Do." The list had grown considerably. Several more pages had been added. Ideas, dreams, places, experiences, a life waiting to be lived. His gaze lingered on the first entry. See the ocean. He smiled, then dipped his brush into fresh ink and added another line. Leave Lotus Pier. This time, it didn't feel like a wish. It felt like a plan.